125th Street, Harlem, New York. We've been teaching so-called Negroes, so-called Hispanics, and so-called Native Indians their true culture and their true identity according to the Bible, according to the scriptures. We are the real Jews that the Bible speaks of. We've been teaching this truth since 1969 under Commander General Yohana. Today is our history class. Keep in mind, one quick announcement, we have classes at 700 Boylston Street, Boston Public Library, 700 Boylston Street, Boston Public Library, from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m., Monday through Wednesday. Once again, Monday through Wednesday from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. So there's no excuses, especially in this hell that we live in now more than ever. We should seek the Lord and seek the Lord and you know, do what we got to do for the Lord to be on our side during these perilous times, if you know what I mean. Okay, so before we get started, questions. Questions online, and then questions in the class. Get it set, let it brew. Just type in on the feed, just type in questions before we get started. See if anyone online got any questions. YouTube is popping up.
I'll check that in a sec. I'm about to get my share on Facebook.
All right, we're gonna get right to it. If there's no questions, let me just pull up some stuff online. Rock, once you're done, once you're done with the Facebook sharing, we're gonna pull up a couple of things. Okay, so today, so this month we know that one of the biggest Holocausts that occurred dating back to the 14th century. I'm gonna say it's 14th century, right? Yeah, dating back to the 14th century, going into the 15th century, one of the biggest Holocausts that occurred was what they would call the Native American, who the world would know them as the Native American, and the massacre that occurred throughout American history. And not only our Gadite brothers, but our Seminole Indian brothers, as well as our brothers in Central America, the Caribbean, and South America. Now, it seems like history seems to blur out when it comes to the Lord's chosen people, and being able to find the sources, credible sources, that can outline the bloody history that our oppressor has, and the crimes that our oppressor has committed against us, seems not to be something that of prevalence in America. Something that is carefully, what's the word I want to use? The situation that happened to our Native American Indian brothers is not something that is carefully examined, not something that's taken serious, whether it's in the school curriculums. It's very brief, and it can be very broad. But today, what I'm gonna bring up is some specifics as to the bloody wars that went on between our oppressors and our Gadite brothers and our Seminole Indian brothers. I'm also gonna bring out some of the strategic moves that our oppressors have made to acquire this land. Some of the strategic moves under a Christian pretense that our oppressors have used and abused to rid us of what's inherently ours. The Bible says that the world was made for our sakes. Can I get that in 2nd Ezra 6:50, I believe?
6:54.
Yeah, let's get that real quick. See, the Earth, the planet Earth that you're walking on right now, and the resources and the land mass on Earth belongs to the Lord's chosen people. And we're going to carefully examine it in the Bible to prove that the world was indeed made for our sakes. But on the flip side, all throughout American history, whether it's the genocide that was committed towards the Mexicans, whether it's the genocide that was committed towards the Native American Indians, on the flip side, our so-called oppressor has put out this propaganda that the world was made for his sakes and that he had divine rights to land that did not belong to him. And so the propaganda against our Native American Indian brothers, our Gadai brothers, and our Seminole Indian brothers was to illustrate them as savages. And, keep in mind there was no television back then. You know what I mean? So how was propaganda spread? Propaganda was spread through stories that people would talk about, or small events that would occur that would spread like wildfire and would put just the idea of superiority into the mind of our oppressor, into the mind of our European oppressors. Let me be more specific. But yeah, let me get 2nd Ezra chapter 6, verse 54. Let's read that.
2nd Ezra chapter 6, verse 54.
Go ahead.
And after these, Adam also, whom thou madest Lord of all thy creatures.
So the Most High made Adam the Lord of all his creatures, right? What's a creature?
A living being.
A living being, right? So, Frenny, pay attention, right? So, Adam was made Lord of all. What? Just read it one more time.
Lord of all thy creatures.
Of all thy creatures, including what? Man and Adam, right? Meaning Adam's descendants were given rulership of the planet since Genesis. And a lot of people need to consider the fact that, yeah, we all come from Adam, right? This is what everyone will say, right? We all bleed red. It's all just one race. But what we don't understand is that the Lord made a divide, and he chose a certain family to rule this planet. Let's keep reading.
Khan Adawan Khan. Of him come we all.
This is what a Christian will say, right? We all come from Adam, right? Of him come we all. Keep reading.
Of him come we all, and the people also whom thou hast chosen.
And now and now this is where you see the divide. He said, of him come we all. But then there's a people that he has chosen that is separated from the rest of the people that came from Adam, right? So to choose something means there's options, right? If you're gonna make a choice is only made with options. If it's only one option, you only have one choice. You don't really have a choice. That's all you have. But if you have more than one option, then now you can make a choice. And the Lord chose a certain people out of all the people that came from Adam. Go ahead.
Verse 55.
Go ahead.
All this have I spoken before thee, O Lord, because thou madest the world for our sakes.
He said he made the world for who?
Our sakes.
See, what we just read is that the Lord, he is claiming in this scripture that the Lord has made the world for our sakes. And the whole theme of the Bible is talking about the Israelites. So the our equates to Israel, equates to the children of the Lord. Keep reading. So when he says he has made the world for our sakes, what he's saying is that this world is to be dominated by us, so-called blacks, so-called Hispanics, and so-called Native Indians. This world is to be under our dominion and under our rulership. That's what it means when it says he has made the world for our sakes. So all the living creatures that came from the Most High, man and animal, is to be under our rulership, under our dominion. Keep reading.
56. As for the other people.
Now, as for the other people, there's a distinction now. So these people, the world was made for their sakes. But as for the other people that come from Adam, keep reading.
Which also come of Adam.
Go ahead.
Thou hast said that they are nothing.
So now, basically, the Lord has made a distinction between a flower pot, and a toilet bowl, right? Who values a toilet bowl? You know what I mean? You do what you got to do. The dross comes out, and you keep it pushing. You know, nobody wants to clean it. It's just that's what it is. But then a flower pot, you're careful with that flower pot. You carefully place it somewhere. You want people to see it. Nobody wants you to see it. Nobody wants to see your toilet bowl unless they have to use it. You know what I mean? You're not gonna put that on display in the middle of the living room. You're gonna hide it in the bathroom. But the flower pot, you put it on display when people first walk into the house. That's the first thing you want them to see. So what the Lord is saying is he's making a distinction between a certain family that came from Adam and then the rest of the families that came from Adam, saying these people are a treasure and these people, I consider them nothing. Keep reading.
But be like unto spittle.
But be like unto spittle. Spittle is like, what's that? It's like the little, it's like the smallest little spit that comes out of your mouth. You know what I mean? Spittle is like, it's like you know when you spit and maybe there might be a little that be hanging out. That's what a spittle is. You know what I'm saying? It's that small excess of spit that comes out. Go ahead.
And has likened the abundance of them unto a drop that falleth from a vessel.
So now let's say if I have a cup and I'm walking around with my cup and a small drop falls from the cup. It's no biggie. You know what I mean? It's nothing that I'm going to cry over. That's how the Lord looks at them. He looks at these other nations as a small drop that comes from a bucket. Now, the reason why I'm bringing that up is because around the time of, who's famously known for this, around the time when, of like Andrew Jackson and James Polk. James Polk was one of the presidents of the United States. Men like these, our oppressors, were propagating the idea that our European counterparts, our European counterparts were, that it basically was their divine right to seize all the land that's before them. The whole idea of manifest destiny, the whole idea of being a superior race in that it's their divine right to take away land that belong to who they considered to be savages. And so basically they only gave the Native Indians two choices. The first choice is to give up your land, and the second choice is to give up your sovereignty. And a lot of wars have taken place, a lot of bloody wars that have taken place, and massacres that have taken place. A lot of treaties have been put in place that have been broken by a so-called oppressor. And so we're going to go through some of these wars. We're going to go through some of these treaties. Understand this, right? A lot of our Gadite brothers and Seminole Indian brothers suffered devastating, population losses, right? Due to like plagues brought by the Europeans, right? And when the settlers came out here, they touched down around 1620, 1616. And Massachusetts played a pivotal role in the succession of our oppressors, in expanding the U.S. and expanding, and colonizing this new world, or colonizing some of the natural territories that our brothers have, have sustained and have survived through for many, for at least 2,000 years, at least the last 2,000 years. And so what the settlers basically done is they brought their diseases and they brought their plagues, which damn near wiped out so many of the tribes, from the Wampanoags to the tribes to the Narragansett tribes, to the Cheyennes, to the Cherokees. All these tribes were being wiped out by these plagues. And the transatlantic slave trade was first instituted with our brothers in the Caribbean, with our brothers in the Americas. You know what I mean? That's when it was first instituted, which we would call, you could either call it the Spanish Inquisition or the Spanish Incursion. Either or is the same, either or works. But it was estimated about, I want to say, 2/3 of the entire nation damn near perished. Prior to pre-Columbus era, our Gadite brothers have multiplied and populated the Americas north. When I say the Americas, I mean north and south, in the tune of 5 to 15 mil, and 2/3 were just nearly wiped off through diseases that were passed on. And so some of the war tactics that our oppressor has used was to basically starve them out, and to use weather conditions. Hey, put that away. And to use weather conditions or weather extremities to get our brothers to go and put on a begging spirit for blankets to stay warm in the winter, because understand the tactics that they were using. Understand that this land was filled with so much buffalo, and the Native Indians were using so many resources to survive, and they were the ones to teach the earlier settlers how to survive, how to stay warm, how to build, how to plant. Because you got to understand that our people have a green thumb, you know what I'm saying? And we're the ones that taught our oppressors how to survive in this land and how to survive through the winter. But what they did was they turned around and took the things that we needed for survival, and one of the biggest things that we needed were the buffaloes, because that was what we used to coat ourselves for winter extremities or whatever. And so many other tribes suffered through the 15th century through European diseases, to the point where we had to go and beg for them. We had to go and beg for for blankets, because we didn't have any way to clothe ourselves. You know what I mean? The fur trade was, understand, around that time, right? the fur trade was heavy in the northeastern region, right? And our so-called oppressor was just hunting for sport and was encouraging other settlers to hunt and kill those buffaloes, kill their source of food, kill their source of clothing. So now our Native Indian brothers would have to suffer and beg for certain resources to survive. You know what I mean? So the first, how can I say this? The first transatlantic slave trade was used as a weapon of war. You know what I mean? Among European colonists, the French, the English, the British, and it was also used as a tactic for survival among Indians who participated. You understand, there were tribes that did participate as slavers or as slave traders to survive. And it's not like they had a, it's not like they had a choice. It's like, the only choice they really had was to either join our oppressors or lose their sovereignty. And it gets to a point where, this is what we got to realize, that it gets to a point that, basically their back was against the wall when it came to battling our so-called oppressors, because you got to realize that our so-called oppressor was blessed with the sword. And so let me get Genesis, right? Actually, let me get Deuteronomy. Let me get Deuteronomy 28 and 21.
You said 28 and 21?
Yeah. Understand that our brothers were under a curse from the Most High. And so this is prophesied that the pestilence would cleave onto them. It would also prophesy that, they would be weak against their enemies because the Lord was not with us. And which is why, our brothers went through what they went through with the so-called white man. But go ahead.
Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 21. The Lord shall make the pestilence cleave unto thee.
And that's what happened to our Native Indian brothers. Those blankets that our oppressors gave them was full of plagues and disease, and damn near wiped out a whole society in the tunes of millions. Right? Keep going. Because the Lord said what?
The Lord will make, the Lord shall make the pestilence cleave unto thee.
Go ahead.
Until he have consumed thee from off the land.
Keep reading.
Whether thou goest to possess it.
He said, no matter where you go to possess the land. You gotta understand, our brothers were spread out from all of South America, the Mayans, the Aztecs, to the Caribbeans with the Taino Indians, and to our Native American brothers up here, even as far as Canada. And the lands that they possessed, they were consumed off the land because the Lord had sent a pestilence to cleave onto thee. The pestilence was coming from our so-called oppressor, who, you got to remember the time of the Black Plague, where the reason for the Black Plague was because we're the ones that taught the world the laws of sanitation, basically to wash up when you're unclean, right? And so the plague that happened in Europe was because, number one, disease was spreading because people weren't washing up. And so now, because they weren't washing up, people were getting sick. And so a lot of those settlers that were over there at that time were bringing that back over here. causing, from things like, give me some of those diseases that they have. Smallpox, things like smallpox, and there's another one.
The bubonic plague.
Yeah, there's quite a few that they brought over here that our people were that were foreign to our people, right? Keep reading. 22.
The Lord shall smite thee with the consumption and with the fever.
Go ahead.
And with the inflammation.
And these are all symptoms of smallpox. These are all symptoms of the diseases that were spread throughout the Americas, slaughtering our people, killing our people. Go ahead.
And with an extreme burning.
Go ahead.
And with the sword.
And with the sword. And that's what our so-called oppressor did. He, the gunpowder changed the game. You know what I mean? That was a game changer. And it's something that our oppressor has used very well to dominate and to conquer and to seize the whole planet Earth. You know what I mean? Through that gunpowder. And he was unstoppable. Our arrows could not stop him. You know what I mean? Keep reading.
And with blasting, and with mildew.
Yep.
And they shall pursue thee until thou perish.
And that's what our so-called oppressor has done. Our Native American brothers were pursued until they perished. And they were pushed out more west to the western frontiers till more settlers decided to come. And now the population was going through a shrinkage. It was getting smaller and smaller. And the reason why they were using a lot of these treaties why the U.S. government was using a lot of these treaties was to acquire their land. And it was a one-sided treaty that how can I say this? With the titled with peace and friendship, which is broken at all angles. You know what I mean? And so these diseases and the epidemics lasted well into the 18th century, up until when what they call the African diaspora or the transatlantic slave trade came about, which basically fueled America at that time, which was probably one of the biggest economies in the world. Was the transatlantic slave trade. Any more on that? So the Spanish Inquisition and the British and English Inquisition, the French Inquisition, was replaced by the African slavery, so-called Africans, really Israelite slavery. And so the slave trade with our Indian brothers, with our Gadite brothers, basically it contributed to a deep decline in the Indian population, and also tying in with the epidemics that were going on. So even Christopher Columbus documented in his own journal about the Spanish Inquisition, the incursions into the Caribbean. You know what I mean? Every European nation that colonized North America utilized Indian slaves, every single one, and they utilized them for construction. They utilized them for plantations. They utilized them for mining. And so, why was it, the question you got to ask yourself is, why was it easier to manage the so-called African slave trade compared to our Native Indian brothers' slave trade? Well, here's the difference, is that our Native Indian brothers, this land was their inheritance. This land they knew very well. They knew how to navigate. So when a Native Indian brother would escape, basically what was going on was he would have a neighboring tribe harbor him in. He would have even his own people harbor him in because he knew how to navigate the lands of America. Compared to our Judite brothers, where if they escaped, they didn't know how to get through, the Mississippi bayous and the forest, because this wasn't, in effect, this wasn't a land that they were used to. And so, what the slave traders decided to do was they decided to ship the Native Indian brothers to the Caribbean, or to like a metropolitan area in Europe. Decided to ship them out there because now they're in foreign land that they're not familiar with. So if they do escape, they're easier to catch compared to, keeping the bulk of them here where they're used to North America, they're used to the land, and they know how to navigate, and they're very hard to catch if they escaped. So around 1650 to about 1730, I want to say within 80 years, at least 50,000 Indians. There could be at least 50,000 Indians were exported by the English alone, just by the English alone, to their Caribbean posts, right? At least 50,000. Now keep in mind, understand that the slave trade was a business, right? This is not something that you could just kind of like, a lot of people were doing a lot of hidden transactions to avoid paying taxes. Tariff tax. Anytime you export something out of the country, you got to pay a tariff, right? And you got to pay taxes. And so a lot of that was hidden to avoid paying that. So the number 50,000 could be extremely low. It could be in the tunes of hundreds of thousands or millions. But those records are pretty slim and blurry. And so between 1670 to 1717, more Indians were exported than Africans imported at that time. You know what I mean? And even like the southern coast regions, entire tribes were exterminated through slavery compared to disease or war. We're talking about entire tribes were exterminated. So what happened now? So now there's a law that comes into place around 1704, right? I want to say that was around the time of when was the American Revolution?
So when was it?
Yeah.
17. No. Yeah, about 1776, I think.
1776, right?
Yeah.
So now around 1704, right? Indian slaves were what they would call conscripted, or sort of like a military recruit, to fight in wars for whatever colony that they were part of, right? And this is a law that was passed in 1704, long before the American Revolution. So now this law was passed where they could take Indian slaves and have them and recruit them for militia services for any war that America had, right? So this is another tactic, because you got to understand, the English was sharing all of North America with the Spaniards and with the French. Keep that in mind. So while the French occupied certain territories in the South, and the Spanish occupied in the Midwest, and the Spanish occupied certain territories in the South, like Florida, and territories in the West, the English, were and the British were brewing. You know what I mean? Their beef was brewing prior to the American Revolution. And so what was going on was there was how can I say this? There was a idea that if we hired certain tribes to help us catch slaves, then essentially we can get some of those guns that the French might be supplying them, some of those guns that the British might be supplying them, because you got to understand that the Native Indians, being at odd with the English, a lot of them sided with the British, and the British were giving them guns at that time. So if the Native Indians, you know what I'm saying, basically they found themselves caught in a colonial strategies for power and economic control. So these three different groups, the French, the Spanish, and the British, they're fighting for economic control, right? They're fighting for power. In the Northeast, there was a lot of fur trade up there. So because of the fur trade that was going on in the Northeast, a lot of those tribes had to migrate to the South. And when they got to the South, a lot of the traders that were in the South, around where the cotton belts were and the plantations were, a lot of those plantation owners were arming our brothers to go and capture slaves in the South. And the reason why they were in cahoots with our oppressors is because they saw it as a means of survival. I'll give you an example. You did a class on Massasoit, right? Give me a brief description of who Massasoit was.
Massasoit was the head tribe out of all the tribes that was in the New England area.
Okay.
They had a certain level of respect and power amongst them. And there were quite a few of the Massasoit people were sold into slavery, into Spain, France, England, Portugal. You know what I'm saying? A lot of them were sold into slavery there. And they were killed off in the most brutal of fashions. Like after a while, they did start to go to war with the oppressors
too.
Narragansetts were, yeah. At first, the Narragansetts and the Massasoits were actually at B.
Yeah.
But then they joined together.
So, I'm going to ask you a question. Massasoit, he was a, chief of most of the tribes in New England, right? There were different tribes. Narragansett was another tribe in Rhode Island.
No, Massasoit was a tribe, not a person.
No, but
the
person, the person Massasoit.
Yeah.
When you carefully study history, Massasoit was actually reverenced by America. Why did I say that?
He ended up trying.
He ended up joining their side.
Yeah.
He was in agreement with them. And the reason, let me ask you a question. What does our oppressor do? What does he do best to conquer a people?
What our oppressor does best to conquer us is to divide and conquer.
There it is. It's to divide us. And so, as the beef was brewing between the Massasoit tribes and the Narragansett tribes, if you actually study, Narragansett was actually...
We got a question on Periscope.
Go ahead.
From Toxic Toy.
Yeah, Toxic Toy. Go ahead.
What's a so-called white man? She wants to know why we're calling him. He wants to know, I don't know. They want to know why we're calling them so-called.
So-called white man?
Yeah.
Because if you look at him, look at that bag right there. Let me get that bag.
This one?
Yeah. Give me that bag. See this bag right here? Let me not advertise. See this bag right here? What color is this bag?
That's white.
It's a white bag, right? I want you to understand one thing. When you look at the so-called white man, right? Friend, I'm gonna ask a child. When you look at the so-called white man, Is this the color you see?
Yeah.
This right here?
Mhm.
White?
Mhm.
Think about what you're saying. I'll give you an example. When I call someone a black man, right? But hey, if I was to say Rock is a black man, is this the color you see?
No.
What color do you see?
See it, right?
You see a variation of brown, right? The brother has melanin, right? Here's what you got to understand. Every nation under this planet, in this planet, is a derivative of brown, except for one nation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Except for one nation. The reason why we call him so-called white man is because his skin is not this color. That's not why we call him that. You know what I'm saying? We know that his skin's not this color, right? But the propaganda behind that is that white is what?
Right.
White is right. White is pure. And what about black?
Evil.
Evil, it's what? It's evil, it's
Dark.
It's dark. You know what I mean? This goes back to the how far back does this go? This goes back into the Renaissance era, right? This goes all the way back to the Renaissance era, where they were whitewashing all the black images. You know what I'm saying? When you read a book called The Russian Icon, it shows you black images of Jesus Christ, black images of the angels. And so all that art was whitewashed. You understand, art back then was how we see television today. You know what I mean? And so we call him the so-called white man because he's not actually white like this. He's not. Right?
No.
He's
Not at all. You know what I mean?
not like
Let me get Genesis. What we're going to show you is who the real red man is. See, there was a stigma, there was this popular belief that our native Indian brothers, I'm glad you brought this up, our native Indian brothers were considered the red man, right? Red equating to savage, violent, bloody, and they were calling him the red man. But we're going to show you who the real red man is. You got it?
Genesis 29, I'm just looking for the exact verse. I'm at 27. Just looking for the exact verse.
There was a brother and sister in Genesis named Jacob and what's her name? What's the wife's name? No, it's Isaac and Rebecca. There was a brother and sister named Isaac and Rebecca that were having twins. And so Rebecca went to inquire of the Lord as to the pains that she was receiving. You gotta understand that these twins were struggling in her womb. They were fighting in her womb. And when the twins came out, they only made mention of one of the sons that came out and didn't make mention or give a description of how the other son came out, how the other son looked. You got it?
Not yet, sir.
They didn't make a mention of how the other son.
Oh, there it is. Got it.
Yeah, go ahead. So now, out of the two sons that were born, the first one, it's going to describe how he comes out, but it doesn't describe how the second one comes out, because the first one that came out was like world news. I mean, nobody has ever seen a child be born the way this child was born. You know what I mean? Go ahead.
Directly to the scripture.
Yeah, get right to it, because I didn't want to finish this.
And the first, Salakia, verse 24. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb.
Go ahead.
And the first came out red, all over like a hairy garment.
Imagine seeing, imagine you turn on CNN, right? And you see, they're showing a news coverage of a brother and sister, right, having a baby. And in the news coverage, the first baby that comes out what?
Red.
Red.
All over like a hairy garment.
And what?
All over like a hairy garment.
Now, the first son comes out red. When a child comes out red, what is that saying? How many black children do you see that come out red? And what?
Hairy.
And hairy. Meaning this. There's a group of people on the planet, when they're angry, you could see the blood show forth through their skin. Right? When they're, give me another example. When they're in the sun too long, right? What color do they turn?
Red.
Right? Every nation on the every nation on the planet is a derivative of brown. But these people have a certain mark on them, and this mark is the same. This mark that they have on them is to identify the murderer on the planet. You know what I mean? It's the mark of Cain, which is going to identify who the murderer is on the planet. So now, when you walk around and you see these individuals, you know who the murderer is on the planet. And here's the problem, is that you can't touch the so-called white man without any consequences, because he has a mark on him. I'm not sure if that answers this question, but that was a biblical answer that I gave you. We call him the so-called white man because because of the dogma, the Catholic dogma, and because of the and because of the Renaissance era of white European culture that whitewashed black images and made white pure and made black disgusting and made it seem like black was like a feces. That's where that comes from. You know what I mean? I'm not black as this coat right here. You see this coat? I'm not as black as this coat. But people call me a what? A black man, right?
Come.
Now, there's East Indians that are my complexion, right? Do they call them a black man? No. They don't, right?
Nope, not at all.
Not at all. You know what I mean? Even Africans, they don't even call them a black man. They call them Africans. You know what I mean? But us, they do call us, the stigma on us, they do call us a black man, which is derogatory. You know what I'm saying? In that sense, it's derogatory in the sense where black is, not good. Black is impure. You know what I mean? That's just to answer your question. But yeah, like, you got your internet up?
I have my what?
You got your internet?
Kind of.
We're gonna go through some more. So basically, in a nutshell, right? Just to get back to what I was saying, slavery was a larger part. Basically, slavery in part was in part of a larger strategy to depopulate the land, to make way for European settlers. Just like the agreements was a larger part, and or was a larger strategy to acquire, Native Indian land, and there was well over there could have been thousands of treaties, and I want to say 80% of them have been broken, at least well over 300 treaties. But okay, let's go through some of these wars real quick while we have 15 minutes left. The Pequot War. Pequot or Pequot?
Pequot.
You could say Pequot. The English language is bastardized. That's why. So there's sometimes it's either neither or neither. You know what I'm saying with the English language. So the Pequot War. So the Pequot War, right? 300 Pequots were massacred, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because America wants you to forget. But in the UPK, we're going to bring things into remembrance, and we're going to remember our brothers during this Pequot War. 300 of them were massacred. Those who remained were sold to slavery and sent to Bermuda. And Bermuda was a big slavery outpost at that time, because they, like I was mentioning earlier, they didn't want the Native Indian brothers to, to stay in a land that they were familiar with, which is why they were shipping them off to the Caribbean or shipping them off to Europe, into a land that they were not familiar with. Some of the major slavery ports, there's 4 major ones at that time. Guess what the first one was? The first and biggest one was? Drum roll.
The hub, the bay.
Boston.
Yeah.
Boston was one of the biggest major slavery ports when it came to our Native Indian brothers. Salem was another one. Mobile, Alabama was another one. And New Orleans was another one. You know what I mean? And in those ports, Indians were shipped to Barbados by the English. And by the French, they were shipped to Martinique and Guadeloupe. By the Dutch, they were shipped to the Antilles. You know what I mean? And so, historical records would indicate that so-called Native Indian brothers were not good slaves. That's what historical records would indicate, which is why they were shipped far from territories that they could easily escape. They knew how to navigate through the wilderness. You know what I'm saying? Which is the reason why when the so-called oppressor acquired the land, a lot of it was wilderness, and he cut it down so he can grow his cotton, so he can build his home, so he can build his cities. And so by 1776, Barbados had banned slavery, saying it was too bloody and dangerous, and an inclination to remain here. You know what I mean? So the biggest thing we were battling was, English encroachment on Native Indian land. And so this is what led to the beef that was going on, or the instability between tribal relationships between the Massasoits and the Wampanoag tribe and the Narragansetts. You know what I'm saying? And so what Massasoit did was he decided to side with the neighbor. Can you get me seek not their peace? He decided to side with the with the earlier settlers around 1620, and he decided to, by him siding with him, he actually became American hero, which is why the state of Massachusetts is named after this tribe, or this brother right here. And so he basically won favor with the earlier settlers and with America by entering into a treaty with them of mutual peace and protection. And it was really why a lot of some of our brothers entered into treaties with them, is for protection from neighboring tribes, and other tribes, across the lands, did similar things by entering into treaties, which were broken in so many different ways. An example of this is there's one here. I'm gonna cut right to it because we ain't got much time. We only got about 10 minutes.
What scripture you looking for?
Yeah. Just hold that real quick. I might have to bring some of these. So I think next week what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring some of the most aggressive acts of genocide. There's a couple that I want to bring up. Next week we're going to talk about the Trail of Tears. Andrew Jackson played a big role. People like Davy Crockett, what's his name? Dave Bowie. Davy Crockett. Yeah, Davy Crockett. He played a big role in some of the massacres. He was actually a young man at that time under Jackson. Creek Wars was a big one. We're going to bring that up next week. But let's step in on Massasoit real quick. So him entering into a treaty with him, whatever. An example of this was called the Shawamet Purchase. Look that up for me. Shawamet Purchase. Let's read that real quick.
How you spell that?
Shawomet. Well, yeah, we're gonna get into some of the bloody massacres next week, and then we're gonna tie it in with your grandma's favorite holiday, Thanksgiving. It's gonna be a big one next week, so definitely tune into class next week.
Well, Grandma's cooking.
And we're gonna show you why Christianity needs to cease.
So I can say what source?
Just use your good judgment.
I got it.
Salaki. The Shawamet Purchase on the Johnston Sunrise. Then and now, historic hindsight, Shawamet Purchase. I don't know why it says part 2, Salaki. Let me back that up.
Just give it brief.
Okay. Using the gift of historic hindsight, we can see that the background of the Shawamet Purchase stems from a tumultuous nature of Samuel Gorton and a quest for religious freedom.
A quest for what?
Religious freedom.
Keep that in mind. A quest for religious freedom. A lot of what was going on during that time with these wars that were going on and how our oppressors were putting our brothers, our Native Indian brothers, under duress and coercing them to sell their land through threats or whatever, was under a religious faction. It was under the the umbrella of Christianity and the idea that it's our God divine right to take your land. Go ahead.
Khan Adawan Khan. Almost since his arrival to America, Gorton was a controversial figure.
Go ahead.
His encounter with the magistrates in Aquidneck emphasizes that.
Go ahead.
In a relatively short period of time, Gorton was again at odds with his neighbors in Portsmouth.
Yep.
The catalyst was an old woman whose cow had trespassed on Gorton's land. She alleged that one of Gorton's maidservants had assaulted her and complained to Nicholas Easton, the deputy governor. Gorton attempted to defend his maidservant in the Aquidneck court.
Go ahead.
And according to the charges against him, Gorton became very abusive when Governor William Coddington attempted to sum up the case before the jury.
Keep reading anymore.
14 charges included that Samuel Gorton contumeliously reproached the magistrates.
Let me see that. Turn that around real quick. I want to see what you're looking at. Scroll down a little bit. Keep going. That's too much. I want to say brief.
Okay.
I want the Shawamet Purchase, the actual purchase. How they acquired Warwick, Rhode Island.
Okay.
That's what I'm looking for. We only got 4 minutes.
Yay. Oh, yay. Yay.
While you look that up, let me just go through this. So by 1632, right, the Wampanoags were engaged in a full-scale war with the Narragansetts around this time, right? So between 1649 and 1657, under pressure from the English, Massasoit sold several large tracts of land in the Plymouth colony, right? Mm-hmm. And in Massasoit, in American history, is held up as an alliance and assumed the love of the English people at this time, right? And so stories of like, what I was saying earlier, stories of like white settlers being kidnapped by Indians and the fear of savage Indians, or what they would call savage Indians, or creating a paranoia, is what escalated a lot of the hate with our Gadite brothers and with our Seminole Indian brothers. And a particular story was a Mary Campbell story, right? So give me the Mary Campbell story real quick. We'll get that real quick. 1 minute. We're gonna jump out of the Shawamet Purchase. Basically, the Shawamet Purchase was this, right? Basically what happened is there was a rogue like Puritan group under Samuel Gorton. So in 1643, what this group was trying to do was they were trying to basically force the people over there to sell under duress a large tract of their land, right? And so what it did was the tribe ended up placing themselves under the protection of the Massachusetts colonies, which then was given to those colonies that land. So a lot of this was going on all out throughout the country, where people were threatening and duressing our brothers to acquire their land. But give me the Mary Campbell Corey. This right here, stories like this is what fueled in a Native American Indian hatred. And so what the U.S. government did was they authorized over 1,500 war attacks and raids on Indian territory, the most of any country in the world against its indigenous people, right? And so by the close of these Indian wars during the late 19th century, fewer than 230,000 Indian people remained out of, I want to say, a sharp decline from like 5 to 15 million living in North America when Columbus first arrived. But give me that Mary Campbell story. Next week we're going to go over reasons for racial genocide. You got that?
What source? I got Wikipedia right
Yeah,
now.
just real quick scope.
Mary Campbell, cultural significance. Mary Campbell is widely known of in Northeast Ohio and parts of Pennsylvania, and is spoken of as an example of courage and fortitude. The story is cited as further evidence of Native American brutality and savagery.
And this is the propaganda that they were using with stories similar to Mary Campbell. But go ahead.
Most longtime residents of that area known the basics of her story, which is frequently told to children, and the general facts of her experience are taught in local schools.
And this is the same thing they did in Nazi Germany, to pump the minds of the youth with stories like this, right? Similar thing, which created a genocide, which is why our press was a genocidal maniac. But go ahead.
Mary Campbell's local popularity had led to a number of books, including Song of Courage, Song of Freedom, the story of the child Mary Campbell, held captive in Ohio by the Delaware Indians from 1959.
For about 6 years.
1759
Yeah.
to 1764.
Yeah.
By Marilyn Seguin. And The Beaded Moccasins, the story of Mary Campbell by Linda Durant. Both books are fictional.
Now, keep in mind, right? So these fictional stories that they were coming up with was fueling hatred for our nation. Just like America is fueled with hatred for our Mexican brothers by teaching people that the Mexicans are criminals and all these lies that they're teaching our people. Well, let me get that one scripture before we leave. And then we out of here. Next week we're gonna wrap this whole thing up and tie it into Thanksgiving. Go ahead.
Khan. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 6. Thou shalt not seek their peace nor their prosperity.
And this is what Massasoit did. He betrayed his people by seeking their peace and their prosperity. But go ahead.
All the days forever.
Forever. And you should never seek the peace of your oppressor, because eventually he's going to backstab you. Keep reading.
That's it on it.
That's it?
Yeah.
All right, good. Eventually he's going to backstab you. eventually he's going to break all the treaties that he's put against him. You know what I'm saying? And he's going to do it in a fashion that's very smooth and strategic. Very smooth and strategic. So we got to be careful of our oppressor by trying to seek his peace. That's I call that the MLK syndrome. You know what I mean? Which essentially tribe leaders like that seeking the peace of your oppressor leads to destruction and the elimination of your people. So next week we're going to go over the genocidal wars. We got quite a few. And with that, we're going to class. Shalom.
Oh.